This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Isotope, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. You're hearing my voice right now through the beautiful Roswell Pro Audio Aztec tube microphone, mixed through Isotope, Ozone, RX, and Neutron, all on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. Also, please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because it's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
Here's where I'm different than some of my peers. And is I came up underneath an established veteran that did things the hard way back in the old days, which meant hands on a fader, like VCA, not even moving faders or anything like that. Hands on a fader, making sure, because he didn't want to over compress it, but he wanted it to be perfect at all times. So he got a lyric sheet and slid it in a sheet protector. And then he got a grease pencil and paper towels. And he would sit there and listen to the vocal and write arrows up or down. And then he would put his finger on the fader and let it play back and do whatever the arrows were telling him to do.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. At Isotope, tone shaping is topping the charts. Meet the Catalyst series, Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia. Plasma's flux saturation technology brings dynamic warmth and depth to your mix. Aurora takes spatial audio to new heights with lush adaptive reverb, while Cascadia adds exciting delays to your mix, retaining clarity through its smart unmasking feature. Get 10% off Plasma, Aurora, Cascadia, or any of the Isotope plugins with the special code ROCK10 and make your mixes rock at isotope.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals like my guest here so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Joe Carrell, a Nashville-based producer, mixer, and recording engineer. Over his 20-plus year career, Joe has mixed and recorded 12, I don't have that many fingers, Grammy-nominated albums, worked on Dove Award-winning songs, contributed to over 38 special #1 charting hits. You like the 38 special?
Yeah, that was nice. Yeah, I do like that.
With Billboard top 10s in multiple categories, all the while producing pop artists and mixing everything from rock, country, jazz, gospel, bluegrass, etc. He currently works from the historic Treasure Isle Recorders right here in Nashville, Tennessee, in Berry Hill. That's where we're sitting right now. Beautiful, beautiful studio. Joe began his journey in the professional music world as an assistant engineer for a member of Nashville's legendary Bradley family. With a strong background as a musician and a deep love for recording, Joe quickly became a sought-after expert in the industry. Today, he shares his passion and expertise on his YouTube channel, In the Mix with Joe Carrell. Great stuff if you haven't seen it yet. We'll have a link for that in the show notes. And in collaboration with platforms like Produce Like a Pro, Warm Audio, and SSL, for example, Joe produces hands-on tutorials for both beginners and seasoned engineers, covering essential mixing and production techniques such as vocal mixing, managing multiple vocal tracks, adding depth to mixes, and insights into his hybrid workflow. He also offers tips on using EQ, stereo widening, automation, subgroups, balancing low-end frequencies, mixing orchestral instruments, beautiful violins and things like that, and crafting commercial audio-ready tracks across a variety of genres. Please welcome Joe Carrell to Recording Studio Rockstars. Joe, are you ready to rock, dude?
I'm very ready to rock. I'm pumped now.
How was that for a first video intro? It's like
that was pretty good, man. I feel good about myself all of a sudden. It's like, wait, I'm cooler than I thought I was.
And we're rolling too, so that really helps. I just took a glance down at the tape machine here.
Nice.
Okay, I said tape machine. It's not really a tape machine. It's the sound devices.
We're showing our age when we say tape machine.
Yeah. Do you still say videotaping? We're videotaping this episode.
Oh, absolutely. Rolling tape. Just just a heads up for all your listeners. Anytime you see a guy's website or bio and it says 20 years plus, that's just a way of saying, okay, I want to stop there. I don't want to say,
Right.
I don't want to admit to any years beyond. That's good enough to sound experienced, but you don't show the true number of years so you don't sound old. That's the way that works.
I mean, it's hard to put a finger on when you start too, because I know for me it was a 4-track recorder initially.
Yeah.
What about you, man? What was give us the sort of the brief arc of your journey from getting interested in music to sitting in front of a gorgeous Trident console and, racks of gear taller than you.
Yeah, gosh. Oh, the very beginnings was just an avid listener. I think a lot of us in my generation, for example, you would probably say the same thing. We didn't have TVs in every room. You had a TV in the living room and it had like 3 channels, right?
Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time in our bedrooms listening to music. Today, that's not as much of a thing today because they've got iPads and phones and everything else at their disposal. And I'm not saying that's bad. There's good in that too. But that said, we spent a lot of time listening to music early on and getting fascinated by it because that was how we entertained her. That was what was in our bedroom, to do.
What was that for you? Cassettes or vinyl? Or CDs?
Vinyl.
Yeah. CDs. CDs was like late 80s.
Yeah, I was vinyl, 8-track tapes and cassette tapes and quarter-inch reel-to-reel. My dad had a quarter-inch reel-to-reel machine, and it still sits in my mix room behind me every day. It's just because some of my earliest memories of music was listening in my dad's big old Pioneer headphones, which are normal-sized headphones, except for the fact that my head was extremely small because I was like, 6 years old or 5 years old or something. And so they fallen off my head. And I remember listening to Crimson and Clover by Tommy James the Shondells over and over and over and over, just rewind and play.
What do you remember about the sound of that?
The tremolo.
Yes.
I mean, it was that's why I listened to it over and over.
And the tremolo was the vocal, wasn't it? Or was it the guitar?
Or was it the whole mix?
Was it the whole thing?
Oh man, I'd have to go back and listen to it. I think it may have been the lead vocal. That's a solid question because I don't remember. I haven't heard that song in a long time.
Yeah.
But, I was already an avid listener, even by that young of an age. But that was so unique, so different that I just remember being mesmerized by it. That slow tempo and I did just over and over and over. We just wore that thing.
Over and over.
It was cool. And I had my first little guitar amp had a tremolo knob on it. And so everything was tremoloed.
Tremolo is so fun. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like a lot of effects, whether you're producing or mixing. Sometimes you're like, this is so cool, but like, when do I use it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We were cutting songs this weekend and the guitar player, the tremolo was on and I heard him strum. I was like, that sounds cool. So we leave it on, but it's,
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's a lot of fun effects like that, which I'm sure we'll get into. But my first instrument was drums. My dad got me a drum set when I was 7 years old. And then I started playing acoustic guitars. I started taking acoustic guitar lessons. I was in 4th grade, whatever age that would be, 9, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
And quickly realized that, I enjoyed it, but drums was really what I enjoyed. So I started in I think it was in 5th grade in our school. You started, got to pick your instrument for band, which started in 6th grade in middle school.
And that's also a time where you like play an instrument for like 1 year and then you switch.
Right.
Something else,
yeah.
Which is, it's kind of great as parents. Sometimes, you're like, is my child not staying focused or something? But like, really, honestly, it's so great to have that like cross section of all these different things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, legendary stories of Alex Van Halen was a guitar player and Eddie Van Halen was the drummer.
Oh,
early
really?
on. I mean, it's like, how would history have been different if they didn't switch instruments,
I was watching videos, I guess recently they're just popping up a bunch for probably obvious reasons that aren't immediately obvious to me. But one of the things watching them play is, I was struck by how locked those two were, Eddie and Alex.
Oh, yeah.
2 brothers playing. The guitar and the drums are the most locked thing of that band.
Yeah. It was, they were astonishing to me. Still are. I still listen to those old records. It's just fascinating how good Eddie was. Like, just a monster. Because, you know, you also have to realize that a lot of what was happening, he was pioneering that stuff, those sounds and those techniques and stuff. You know, you listen to guitar players that were alive in that era, you know, after they got Van Halen 1, being like, "What? I don't even know what just happened." They start the record and they're listening to Eruption, and I have no idea what just completely lost. You know, I don't know what I just heard.
Yeah,
something is changing. You know, the ground is shaking under my feet, and I don't know what. You know,
that just makes me think of that scene in Back to the Future when. Yeah, he comes out, Michael Fox, and he comes out and he's like, I think they're just not ready for that yet.
Exactly. That's awesome stuff.
So for you, drums and acoustic guitar, and then what were you saying what were you studying in the band at school? Was it drums or guitar?
Drums? Yeah. That's
so like snare rudiments.
Right. Which is great because rudiments, you know, are so important, you know, and I think all the stuff you go through young learning, even though it seems boring at the time, is not only does it become a big part of your discipline as a musician, but it becomes part of your discipline as a human being. And, you know, the drive to stay at something, even when it seems boring, but you have your eyes on the prize.
Yeah.
You know, this drum lesson may have been the most boring thing in the world. Reading through this, you know, this page that I had to take home and play is the most boring thing in the world. But then you put on for me, it was my Kiss records or Cheap Trick records.
Yeah.
And hearing that and being like, okay, eyes on the prize. This sucks, but that's where I want to get to. So I have to go through these steps. It's just a wonderful discipline. I'm a big fan and advocate of school band. Which is funny
to imagine, like, did Cheap Trick and Kiss have a lot of snare rudiments in it?
No, but
you know, very precise, intentional parts.
Right. To become a rock star, though, you have to go through. You have to build ground up. You know, there's nothing pretty about the bricks that are the foundation, but the house is gonna suck without it. Same thing as a musician, man. If you don't know your scales, you don't know your rudiments, whatever, you're only going to be so great. You know, you listen. You know, and it took me a while to figure that out. When you would listen to some of the great drummers, you know, when I was really starting to get into, you know, the guys that were out there, and you would listen to their solos or their fills and stuff, and you're like, wait a minute, that sticking pattern is actually a paradiddle diddle. It starts sinking in. It's like, this stuff isn't just training anymore. It's like it actually just it flew right out of Buddy Rich or whomever the guy was that I was watching as a young kid, instinctually, you know, because of all those hours. So I actually became a big fan. Like, I took rudiments and stuff extremely serious from a certain point on.
And were you a big Buddy Rich fan at that point too? I'm sure you've heard all the stories.
Yeah. I was honestly more of a rocker. I grew up, my parents mostly listened to top 40 country, you know, top 40 radio at the time. So that would have been, gosh, my childhood was Fleetwood Mac and Tom Petty and stuff like that. But just Creedence Clearwater Revival. My dad loved those guys, so he would play those. So I was more of and you know, my first, you know, real musical crush, as if that's what we want to call it, as far as like focused on like listening to over and over and wanting to be them, was Cheap Trick and Kiss. Cheap Trick live at Budokan changed my world in 1978.
Yeah, I mean,
and I was young, man.
I loved I loved all that stuff, but I didn't. It's funny how like we, you know, attach to different styles or different particular bands or records. I mean, you know, the odd record for me was like my mom bought my brother records, and somebody at the record store told her to get Grateful Dead Dead Set.
Oh yeah,
for my younger brother. So she gave him that. He didn't like it at all, but I picked it up and I was like, wow, space is really cool. I really like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you just like have these things that you love. So, you know, it's also interesting because you talk about like the rudiments, and I wonder if you notice this or feel this. The more pro you get, you know, the players that play so well on sessions, I'm always struck by how simple the parts are a lot of times. Just like it's knowing how to just play exactly the right chord without screwing it up in the right place.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's almost like the amateur level we begin with is just sort of messy and too much stuff.
Right. Oh, I know that when I record young bands, that's my biggest problem, is trying to convince the bass player and the drummer, play less.
Yeah.
We need less subdivisions.
Yeah.
You know, listen to the story of the song. This isn't a show about trying to be Vinnie Colaiuta right now. This is 2 and 4, and mark the downbeat of the chorus with a cymbal crash. It's like literally that simple.
Well, it's cool that you brought up the term subdivisions, because I mean now we're getting into the weeds a little bit, which I love.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think you discover in the studio is like a magnifying glass, right? Where you're like really getting a close look at like hopefully this video is, there's a good light on us. Hopefully the camera's in focus and you really can see some details. And then you're like, boy, I hope I, shaved all the way this morning. Or whatever. But in the studio, it's like, you bring in this band, you bring in the music, and it becomes, and you put it under some sort of focus, and you hear things like the subdivision thing, in the rehearsal space. Maybe the drummer mostly hears themselves, and maybe they hear some other instrument. Maybe they don't hear a lot of the vocal, or they don't hear the acoustic. But in the studio, you start discovering that like, oh, the subdivisions are in that vocal phrasing and in that acoustic part. You don't need so many in the other instrument, in the guitar. You don't need all the in-between notes. You don't necessarily need all fancy hi-hats.
And all the extra kick subdivisions are making it sound too aggressive and rocky, and that's not the mood of the song. Lonnie Wilson is a fantastic studio drummer here in Nashville, extremely successful as a studio drummer and a songwriter and a producer. And he's played on tons of hits. Like if you Google Lonnie Wilson, you're going to be like, oh my God. If you know anything about country music, he's been everywhere. That said, he'll be the first to tell you, I made my living off of backbeats and marking scene changes. We're going into a chorus. I'll mark it. Here's a little fill with a cymbal crash.
Yeah.
Here's the bridge. I'll mark it. I'll play ride cymbal after I do my crash. Like bare bones, not being ashamed of that, taking the money, and playing what's needed for the song, and not making it about him and making it about drums. This is not a drum feature. This is Chattahoochee by Alan Jackson or whatever the case may be. It's not about the drums being Vinny. There's time and place for that, but a lot of times that's not.
Well, what would Vinny do? When you say that, like, what does that even mean to you?
Well,
what do you picture?
He gets hired a lot because he's Vinny. So
are you thinking like him playing with Frank Zappa? Or
right, exactly. Like, so many of what we see online, where people will record with him still to this day out in LA and film it and then post it on YouTube or whatever, because people like me and my assistant Jackson can't wait to watch it. It's like, that's freaking Vinny. And when we hear Vinny, we want to hear Vinny be Vinny because we know what he's capable of.
Speaking of which, let's mention a skill set here. Jackson's right off camera right here.
Yes, he is.
He's incredibly quiet right now.
He is. Yeah, he knows.
Rock Jackson. He's also got his laptop ready and waiting. So if we need an answer to something, you may hear a voice come off camera just giving us the answer.
The key, because you'll be able to verify this. The key to being a great mix assistant is being able to be extremely quiet. Is that not right?
Right.
You have to know your technical stuff, but when it's not time to chat or it's not time to talk, you just be very quiet. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's variations to that, being quiet in the studio. So some of the things I only realize years into it as the one sitting up in front of the speaker. So for example, when I have a band in, like I did recently, and I put great value on, I just listened loud while I was out there playing a guitar part, and I'm coming in to comp it. And all I have to do is focus on timing and tuning of these parts. I do not need the speakers loud. So I am turning them way down to work. And I love to, when I was young, you think you want to crank it up all the time, but as you do this for a long time, you start to really appreciate working at low volumes, especially once you put in good speakers and can hear what you're doing.
And there's lots of reasons for it. Lots of reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, your room, any air that exists in the acoustics of your room is magnified with volume.
Yeah.
So low volume is more accurate. Your focus level is more. the things that should be in the forefront are in the forefront. Longer work days without hearing.
By keeping the levels down.
Yeah. Longer career. I mean, there's a lot of reasons.
And then, so I'll sit there and I'll turn it way down and I'm mentally going into like extreme focus. But then the people who are in the room having a good time, they're like, oh, the speakers are down. We can start having a good party. We want to get excited about it. And it's like, man, you guys got to shut up and get out of the control room.
Please, the potato chip bag in the lounge, please.
Yeah. But like the smallest thing will distract you. Somebody shuffling, just not even realizing that they're making a sound.
Yeah.
But, and yet when, previously I was that guy making too much noise.
Oh yeah. We've all been that guy, because you get involved in a conversation, you just kind of forget where you are for a minute. But when we have the same problem here. As big as this control room is on tracking days, when I'm trying to work with my assistant and the guitar player or whomever it is about punching. So the drummer's done, the bass player's done, a lot producers in here, they start, even though they're highly paid professionals that have 30 years or whatever of experience, you'll forget from time to time. And you're like, I can't hear the guitar player trying to tell me what punch he needs. What bars in verse 2 is that he needs? And you have to, either intentionally talk really loud so they hear like, oh crap, I need to quiet down. We all do it. It's human nature. But
Native Instruments introduces the new Complete 15 bundle featuring Contact 8, offering versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative effects. Perfect for creating everything from emotional scores to dance floor grooves. Contact 8 includes exciting new creative tools like chords and phrases for inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth sounds. The Complete 15 bundle also includes updated Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro and AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. You do bring up an important topic, which is communication in the studio. And we're talking particularly about classic studio settings with a band. You've got people in different spaces, different rooms, there's a control room. Obviously, modern records, there's all sorts of variations. A lot of modern records are nothing more than a laptop and one person on a vocal mic, and communication is maybe you're looking right at them. But talk about some of the things that work really well for you in a pro studio like Treasure Isle, where you've got communication between different band members. How do you prefer to set that up, and what works really well?
Well, for me personally, budgets kind of dictate it. Sometimes you're working in a small room that's Pro Tools based, and you're the guy. You're the lead engineer, you're the assistant engineer, you're the tape op, you're the communication and everything. But what I hope to have most days when I go to the studio, especially a studio like this, is I want to be the lead engineer. So I want to get the sounds, and I want to set the tone for the control room. I want to be the communication guy. Because I'm right here with the button. And so it's easy. And I have a chart in front of me. And then I have my tape operator, my assistant engineer over directly to in this room, directly to my left. And they're listening. They should be listening just as intently as I am. So,
and that's hard to do.
Yeah. But
as an assistant, it's hard to do. Right.
But good assistants can, develop that skill, which is part of the skill they need to take this chair someday. And so it works like a well-oiled machine, or orchestra days are, like, for example, are really intense because those people read scores. They're not making anything up. They're reading predetermined parts, and they know these people do this. Cities like LA and Nashville and London, these orchestras work every day in the studio. So they have a system, and the system is they play it down, and they know, like the cello player knows, I need bar 15 and 16 one more time. Everybody does that. And so they start calling this stuff out. Well, they're being paid by the hour. And so the labels and the producers have budget, concerns because they're
not
paying
here
a lot.
Just for the pizza?
No, not at all. But they've got to, usually they have to get a lot of music done. That's just the way orchestra sessions work. A lot of music done because it's an expensive day. You may have 12 players out there. You may have 20. People writing the scores, the copyists. I mean, it's a very expensive day. so we have to be, me and my assistant and whoever first chair is out there, who whether it's the arranger or first chair violin, that kind of a thing, are just spitting out bar numbers, just bam, 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 and that's how we get songs just ripping.
So you're looking at a score in front of you too?
Yeah, exactly.
And you feel like as an engineer, that's going to be a required skill. How do you manage that? How as an engineer, you're like, look, I didn't go to Juilliard to study violin. I'm an engineer. How do you live in that world to read a score, but not necessarily know how to read music in the same way?
That's a great point. First of all, the engineer doesn't have to know that that's a D flat, in treble clef, or that we don't have to know that very often. That's between the arranger and the players.
Yeah.
But what we do have to know is when we look at the score, we see they play bar 1 through 5, and then they're out again for 16 measures. Okay, time is money. So I have to be able to tell my assistant, it's like, hey, after bar 5, push stop, and then we're gonna, if they play 3 passes, we're gonna triple stack it, all bars 1 through 5. Then I'm gonna say, depending on the tempo, I'm going to say bar 14 for 16. And they know, because even if the cello player doesn't play, he knows that somebody else in the room is going to be playing there. It's just a super well-oiled machine. And so then there may be another 12 bar break or a 16 bar break later in the song or something. So if I'm communicating with my assistant, okay, stop, now move ahead. And I have the button pressed down. I'm talking to the players at the same time as I'm talking to him or her. So I'm saying 35 for 37. I mean, that's what they have to know.
Right.
And so
you have matching scores, and those numbers have to match up too.
On rhythm section days, my assistant is following a chart too, because they have to see when the guitar player says, I need the 45 in the second line of the chorus, meaning they need the F and the G, they have to know where that's at. On orchestra days, there's no time for that. We are moving so fast that I have to be the communicator, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I've always got either a chart or a score in front of me. But I don't, for our friends out there that are not trained on sight reading or any of that kind of stuff with scores, don't be scared of it. You pick it up. You start seeing note length. And this is the kind of stuff they can study at home. Like even if they're self-taught, and I was in band, so I kind of, learned note values from the 4th grade on, but they can do that at home too. Just in free 20 minutes here and there throughout their day, they can study, how to read, what a quarter note is, what an eighth note is, what does a rest look like, and those kind of, so
or don't extended note, a long note, or shorter, or
they don't have to be,
or something.
They don't have to be scared of it because they don't have to be able to go out there and play it. And like I said, they don't even have to know. I'm not thinking when I see a note, it's like, okay, I'm not thinking of what note it is even.
Is the assistant typically looking at a score also?
Not on orchestra days. They're looking at it. It
seems like that'd be a good way to start understanding it too. But maybe they're too busy looking at
they've got there's a lot of buttons pushing, going on.
Boy, I'll tell you that the button pushing that drives me bananas is the talkback button pushing.
Right.
When you're like, every time you stop something, you have to hit 5 buttons, and then the guy behind you talks, and then you hit 5 buttons, and then the other guy talks, then you hit 5 buttons, and the guy behind you talks.
Yeah.
And then you hit the wrong button backwards. How many times have you turned off the talkback and then said a whole really important thing to the person, and then you turn it back on and thinking you just turned it off?
A million times. On those consoles that had latching. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Where you it could be stuck on or true momentary or whatever, and you can actually get yourself in trouble doing that.
Oh yeah, because you said the wrong thing. I learned that. I learned that.
I've seen that happen. Another thing about scores with the assistant, a lot of times they're very big, and so there's just not room on the Pro Tools cart for that kind of a thing. Yeah. So we usually spread them out across the console. So if they really need to see it, they can. Certain studios are wired up differently. Ocean Way, for example, when I worked there, the house assistants always have the score in front of them, and they're helping me keep track of all that stuff. But here, there's just not room for it, so I don't require my people to read scores, along with me. They need to be able to read them because they have to be able to step into my chair at times. Yeah. But again, I really recommend people that want to be if they're watching this and they're like, man, I really want to move to a town like London or Nashville or LA and really be a successful tracking engineer get to do orchestras and rhythm sections and all that kind of stuff. That's just one of those things that I think they should take serious, but not be scared of it, because it's not scary. It's really not.
You just don't know it till you know it.
Yeah, exactly. It's not scary.
And I mean, with so many of these things, just being dedicated, incredibly quiet, like Jackson here to my right, and also just being like a good person and being very helpful. Don't you feel like a big part of getting rolling initially, whether you were aware of it or not, was giving everybody that you were working with or learning from the impression that you cared a lot about what was happening?
Absolutely.
And that you were like dead serious about making it work well for them?
Absolutely. I can't say it enough. I can't stress it enough that to be in a room like this, to come in as an intern is one thing. Every studio takes people that graduate from Full Sail or Crass or Blackbird or whatever, and that's part of the deal. But you don't want to just get into that room and observe once or twice, during your semester of internship. You want to stay in the room.
Yeah.
If you want to stay in the room, you have to be well liked. I think a lot of our young friends think they have to be great mixers. They have to be great this, all the technical stuff, be Pro Tools experts, and all that stuff is great. But the thing is, you're not going to be on the level of the guys that you're in the room with.
Right.
You're not. So don't try to impress them with your skills. Soak up their skills, while you're growing, getting your feet underneath you. If you're going to stay in that room, it's because they like you and they want you there. It's like, hey, I like that kid. Kid's a good kid. Some of the things that I'm thinking about that really impressed me as far as some early assistants and interns that I had was, I remember one where here we go, bottle of water, right? Having it set on the console thing behind me, because I was in the studio where it's like you're facing this way to mix and your gear rack's behind you. So that's where your coffee or your water or whatever it was.
Yeah. It
hit me because I knew I had just finished a bottle of water. So I was going to have to get up next time I was thirsty. So I turned around and it was there was a new bottle of water there. I didn't ask for it. They just did it. It's like those instincts of, what can I do to help?
Yeah.
How can I be of a service to this room? In what way? Right now, the trash is overflowing. They just took it out. You know what I mean? And I know some of our viewers, when I talk about that kind of stuff, some of our viewers are going to be like, that's stupid. That has nothing to do with my, degree. I'm not here to be a servant to anybody. Well, then you may as well think about just staying in Omaha or wherever you're from,
right.
Because to get into these rooms, we're all servants to each other.
Right. We're all servants to the record we're trying
We
to
are.
make.
The musician, the producer is serving the musicians. The lead engineer is serving the producer and the band. The assistant is serving the lead engineer. The third level assistant is serving everyone. Like you have to go through those steps to get up the ladder.
And guess who the record's serving?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just the listeners. Whoever's on that final end of listening to that, that's who you're serving.
100%. I mean,
right?
if you think you're too good to be a servant to somebody, the music industry really is not your. Maybe if you're an artist, but if you want to be on this side of it, because this is a very service-based industry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you chose obvious topics like bottle of water and trash and, cleaning bathrooms or whatever, but let's pick some other ones that just maybe make more sense to people right away too. So for example, how often I hear musicians trying to figure out, like, they'll say something like, oh, I need to make a change to this, or like, oh, this pencil's not really working. And it's like, that's your opportunity. It's like, leap out of your chair.
Absolutely.
And deliver a sharp pencil to that person.
Absolutely.
Immediately, because they're trying to get the song tracked. And it's like, these little details are all just part of getting to the finish line and getting the song recording.
I tell all my, and Jackson will attest to this, every assistant I've ever had or intern, I tell them we as soon as we see a musician on tracking day arrive, we instantly go out there and ask them what we can help them with.
Yeah.
And that goes for me as the lead engineer or whatever. Then there's usually 3 of us here on tracking days. I'm out there with them if I can be. Maybe I'm doing something in the control room. Maybe I'm getting drum sounds, so I can't walk to the guitar player's car and help him carry in, the 8 electric guitars or acoustics that he brought that day. But they can, and that makes an impact on those players.
Yeah,
it does. you will get hired more and more and as a studio, it's like, man, their staff, they're so friendly. They take care of me all the time. They're always asking, somebody mentioned coffee and they're like, can I get you one? As they help me carry in my instruments, they help me carry out my instruments. Like, people remember that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Do you like cream in your coffee?
Yeah, exactly. You want to be successful.
One of the things I have noticed, this is maybe a tip for future assistants, is the definitely help. So whoever it is that you're there working with, like you, Joe, like if I was assisting you, I should know that you're very busy. You're up at the speakers. You can't get up and do something because you literally just finished recording something and you immediately have to do 5 to 10 edits. And then you still don't get to get up out of the chair because the next person wants to do their thing and you're stuck there, right? And the assistants should recognize that. And so that therefore, that's why it's so super helpful for an assistant to go, help park the car for so-and-so, or like bring in the stuff or get the food, or, set up lunch with utensils and napkins so that everybody can just sit right down and eat.
Right.
That's why it's so helpful. But the other thing, and then, cleaning up glasses and taking out trash. But one pro tip for the assistant is also recognize that because Joe was so busy, he actually didn't see you do it. So in an appropriate, discreet way later, you can mention like, man, I got the dishes for you. We're good to go.
Yeah,
just something like that. Cause I've had that happen to me where like, it's easy when you're producing and engineering to remember the things that don't work. But if you weren't aware of all the things that work so well, you might not remember it later.
Right. That's true.
So it can be a little bit helpful.
And most of us that run studios, we have a certain set of like a checklist at the end of the day or whatever. We just know we're going to have to go through.
It's called trying to get out the door and get home to dinner on time.
But you notice what's done and what's not, and who did it if it's done. And the thing is, I know it doesn't seem glamorous. It doesn't. And you know why it doesn't seem glamorous? Because it's not. You're right. Cleaning a toilet, washing dishes, going to Starbucks and picking up an order, that's not glamorous. Yeah. But it's your doorway to here.
But what is glamorous? Like, what are the glamour moments that you enjoy?
Well, as your career develops, there's lots of them.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there's way less of them than people assume. It's like you're in the studio every day in Nashville and you're recording, this great musician and that great musician and, get those plaques on your wall and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's all cool. But I also spend, a lot of 12 and 14 and 16-hour days all alone in a dark room all by myself on weekends, on holidays, even 4th of July's, Labor Days, Memorial Days.
The number of beautiful days outside, the number of like gorgeous spring days in Nashville that I've stepped out and I was like, oh man, I missed another one.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But really to be successful in this career path as a musician, producer, engineer, because it's all the same. It's a massive sacrifice. Yeah. From that when you're in high school, the time spent in the practice room instead of going to all the sports games or hanging out with your buddy or whatever, because it's like, you have that drive. I can't achieve what I want unless I'm in here playing my drums this many hours a week or whatever the case may be. Although that goes with you throughout your whole career.
Locked in a room with a click track.
Exactly. You have to love it. You just really do. Does it get old? Absolutely. Especially as we get older, you start thinking about all the life that you missed, but at the same time, you're doing what you love. Yeah. And if you wasn't doing this, you wouldn't be happy. Like this is all I know. I've committed my whole life to this. Yeah. If I was working, because I did on, this, I didn't get right out of college and be immediately successful at this. It takes a while. It takes time. So I had to work a lot of other jobs. And what are you doing while you're at that job? You have a lot more free time. Right? Because it's 9 to 5 or it's whatever.
You're listening to that record. That
exactly.
To hit the studio.
What are you doing when you're not, at work, or even when you're at work? You're thinking about wishing you could be in a room like this. You're exactly right. You're listening to a record thinking, I wanted to be there when it was made.
Well, I was thinking when I asked you the glamour moment, I was sort of thinking of those times where the work is done, the end of the day, those moments that do show up where you're just all hanging out and you press play and you listen back to what was done. And those sort of are the glamour moments for me. They're just it's so thrilling to hear it all play back when the whole event felt like you were on a club soccer team together and you all scored a goal, or something like that.
Well, that's a good point because, I mentioned how much unglamorous there is because there's a lot of very unglamorous. You're not working with celebrities every day in this industry, things like that.
Celebrities are kind of a pain in the ass.
They can be. But that said,
not all of them.
No, not at all. But that said, okay, so I'm a lot of my career is as a mixing specialist. I get stuff from all over the world sent to me that I didn't record to try to make it sound like a record, and I love doing that. I mean, it's who I am at my very core. So no matter what the tracks sound like when I start, whether they're great, whether they suck, whether they're in the middle, whatever the case may be, whether I spend 2 hours on that song or whether I spend 8 on that song, at the end of it, no matter how much of a grind it was to get there, at the end of it, when you listen back, and I start my screensaver so I'm not seeing any Pro Tools meters or anything, I'm a listener again. When you listen to it and you're like, man, that sounds good. Those little moments. Yeah. That I live for those. I mean, absolutely live for them. I would never get that out doing anything else.
And it's
Nothing
true.
else would be
Sometimes
that way for me.
you feel that way, and then you turn around and you're like, man, did you? Oh, shit, I'm here by myself again.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode.
Sometimes as challenging as this career path is, as all-consuming, life stealing, because it really is. All that to say, said, there's constantly moments where I push play on a track, and I'm so, grateful that I had the opportunity to do it.
Yeah,
it's a big deal.
Yeah, I've felt that many times, and I like at this point, one of the thrilling sessions for me is going in and doing like a power weekend with the band. Like I like getting a bunch of people together in the studio and all really just giving it your all for a focused length of time. And, you coming up on the end of the session. Mm-hmm. And so there's your decision maker about what overdub you do and whether it's good enough or not. It's like, keep moving, I just like those things. And, all sorts of different sessions have different benefits, One's working for a very long time on a piece can also be incredibly rewarding because maybe you really dial it in the way you want it. But it's, it is that group collaboration that's really kind of wonderful.
Most engineers and musicians will tell you that the non-glamorous jobs. So some days you get to walk into a great studio that's got a great staff and assistant, and every mic is set up per your specification. Every patch is done. I mean, you've been there. And you're working on something really cool, and it, it is a kind of a glamorous day. But what most of us would tell you, a lot of our chops, as far as our skill set, like how did we get good enough at what we do to get hired on that glamorous job?
Right.
Is those unglamorous days where you're working with a no-name artist or artists, and you're having to slam out as a player. It's like we got to get like 12 songs done today.
Yeah.
And so they're deciding what passes. For their accuracy, number one, and there has to be on point. So it's like that's their schooling for the great stuff.
Yeah,
is the not great stuff because they still have to sound great. They can't phone anything in. They have to nail it fast, and same with the engineering. We've had days where I've had to get drum sounds on the entire kit in just a couple minutes. Those aren't glamorous, but those are what makes you great at your job, because you're just like, okay, I gotta be able to do this. I gotta be able to focus and meet the producer's, expectations, because he wanted to be started by 10, and it's 10:57, and the drummer just sat down, and like if I'm going to please him, I got to have the drums sounding great in 3 minutes. Count it off. Let's do it.
Yeah. And I love doing the 12 songs in one day things for that reason too. Although I do notice in my own experience, it goes something like this. The thrill is at the beginning. It's setting up what I like to call the machine. The whole studio with all the musicians and the headphones and the sounds and everything. And you're like, it's a machine that you create,
Yeah.
And then you set it off and you go, and then the next challenge is sort of staying awake through 12 songs, because you're no longer needed for real critical thinking. You're just sort of making sure it keeps running.
Right.
And also 12 songs all day, you don't want the speakers cranking in front of your face all day. You want to, you turn it down, and just try and listen for stuff.
From our musician friend standpoint, though, all the great studio players have done those demo days, demo slams, or whatever they want to call them. And they'll all tell you, it's like that, man, that was a big part of developing who I am.
Yeah.
It's like playing in church or something when you're a kid. Like all that stuff is so important to becoming the studio great, whether it's as a producer, engineer, guitar player, it doesn't matter. All that seemingly, low budget, low glamour, slam bam, thank you, ma'am, kind of stuff is really where you build your character and your chops and your real confidence and skill set that you're going to need to play the stuff that will put a plaque on your wall.
When you're playing 12 songs in a day, you are not noodling in between songs.
No.
You're just quiet. We're getting the chart out for the next one.
Yeah, you're more worried about your calluses coming off, right?
So thinking about volume again, one of the things that I've been putting myself more out on the other side as a player recently, which has been a big thrill for me, sort of getting back to my roots. And I'm discovering things like headphone volume is a real, it's a risk moment. Like I can get lost in an overdub and spend an hour on it, because time goes quickly when you're playing. I've discovered. And and then you get out of that hour and you're like, oh, did I have my headphones up too loud? What stuff have you heard from players and stuff? Are there like one of the things I started practicing sometimes is put the headphones on, approve the sound and the tone and the balance, and then take the headphones off, sink earplugs in deep, put the headphones back on, or like turn them down or something. Do you get some tips from musicians? Do you have any yourself about ways to manage being in that rock and roll moment, but not killing your ears for long stretches?
Well, as a drummer, I'm right beside the loudest instrument on the stage. So going way back into my 20s, when I first started noticing tinnitus, it's like, uh-oh, it's like it's starting to happen.
Yeah.
I started wearing the foam expandable earplugs every time I play. When I mow the yard, I mean, you name it. I even wear them when I drive.
Yeah.
And long distances, family vacations, I have my earplugs in.
Yeah.
Because the road noise.
The AirPod Pros are pretty great for that too, because they actually cancel out a lot.
I use them all the time until my ears get sore.
Yeah.
Like every time I commute, when I was driving down here today, they were on, they were in, noise canceling on, and Hall & Oates was at a very low volume.
Right. I almost found that they did a better job on the airplane than my foam earplugs did.
Absolutely. They're fantastic. They're essential on airplanes. Yeah. Some type of hearing protection. But when it comes to studio specific stuff, players that have to be out in the control room with the drummer, well, a couple things. The drummers and the players that have to be out in there are getting either those I can't think of the name of them, but they're like almost like a gun.
The isolation
headphones,
headphones,
like made for guns. Like it really cuts the level way, way, way down.
Right.
So they can listen at a more reasonable level. Number
what
two
about
is
in-ears. I've been wondering if in-ears do a really good job of
that's
blocking.
Exactly where I was going. A lot of the drummers nowadays are getting the custom molds. So it cuts down the live volume in the room by a significant amount of decibels. And so then they can control your volume that way. And a lot of the guys, you know, you don't see that a lot from acoustic guitar players and piano players and stuff like that because they're not in the room with the live drum kit. So it's mostly, you know, bass players, drummers, and sometimes electric guitar players too, because a lot of times they're setting out in the live room.
Yeah.
And
if you're standing, it's nice. It feels good to be near the drums as a player.
Right, yeah.
But you're like, I don't want to have to crank my headphones up so loud to feel like an amp loud enough.
And you're playing for 9 hours, you know,
right.
If you're playing a triple, that's 9 hours in the chair.
Yeah,
9 hours.
I mean, for me, I would have to keep the level down really quiet.
Yeah.
You know? But quick question. Are there any particular shout outs about in-ears? Like, are there brands or models or anything you've heard about?
No, I really don't, because I don't have any. I've just noticed, you know, over the last, I'm trying to think how many years, 10 years or so, it's really became common to see especially the drummers.
Yeah.
You know, you're starting to see them a lot.
Well, they probably have them already for touring.
Yeah. Some of these guys.
Yeah, some of
the guys do road dates. Yeah, still.
And I've heard some people say that the sort of like the cheap Sony ones or something that are $100 on Amazon are actually quite good.
They could be. Yeah. And I will say on a side note is we've all also worked for a lot of studios players, and some of them are legends that are in their 40s and 50s and 60s and stuff, and they are really having significant hearing problems. Yeah. And because they never did protect their ears. So they were setting out there 9 hours a day with high volumes. And some of them, it's even a joke about, you know, I'm not going to name any names, but we'll just randomly say Don about, you know, like, it's like, oh my God, did you hear Don's headphones today? Because, you know, they would take them off and lay them on the keyboard or lay them on their music stand. Screaming. And you walk out there and the click track is going, bam, 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 bam. You know, it's like, oh my God, they know that those drivers are that far from their eardrum and they're just killing themselves. And they start losing high frequencies. Tinnitus gets really bad. And you know, they'd be the first to admit, it's like, yeah, my hearing is like trash. Yeah. But they did it to themselves, you know?
Yeah. And we all do it to ourselves.
Oh,
so
exactly.
We got to be so careful, especially, I mean, maybe there's a benefit to being the engineer, mixer, producer, because we maybe are first ones to be attentive to that because we're worried about, like, you know, balancing mixes and stuff and hearing all these frequencies. Whereas a musician, you might be more likely to kind of push the boundaries. I mean, we all start out pushing the boundaries because when we're young, we're like, this is fun.
Oh, man,
crank it up. I love how
I used to play with open back headphones, like on like Walkmans, played my drums too. I turned my Walkman up loud enough that I could hear. I loved music so much that I would mow my yard with open back Walkmans turned up when I was like 14, 15 years old.
I've been enjoying the fact that the AirPod Pros make it a lot easier to do that.
Yeah, but it was not that. I don't advise doing that, by the way. Is you know, I wish I had those years back and knew what I know now.
Yeah.
But you know, for us, it's the hours that we work.
Yeah.
You know, session days. The producer, the artist, they want to hear their music fairly loud in the control room a lot. And we just, as engineers, you just have to deal with it. Again, a service-based industry.
So what about that? Because I've got some thoughts about that. I've you know, accumulated some other
anytime we can
ideas.
Because me and my assistant are always thinking the same thing. So anytime we can, they get caught up in a conversation, they leave the room, whatever, we turn it down just a little bit, you know. And when it comes time for the final listen back, a lot of times we leave the room.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, hey, you know,
I step away from the speakers all the time. I like to turn it up and I just walk towards the kitchen.
Yeah. I always tell my clients to say, hey, I'm not precious about these faders. You know, there's engineer stories of guys that are notorious, like, you don't touch his faders.
You don't electrify them so they'll zap somebody and knock them out.
My faders are anyone's property. So if a producer or an artist wants to come up here and sit and turn it up to, you know, 100 decibels, whatever they want to do, and they want to get their hands dirty on the faders, by all means do it. I'll give them a good, you know, what I think is a good rough mix. And then, and a lot of times, you know, we find ourselves working for the same people over and over a lot. You know, you kind of get into niche, certain niches in certain rooms, and it becomes kind of a joke with a lot of the engineers. You know, it's like the engineer has to leave the room because it's time for the listen back. You know, and it just becomes a part of the fun.
Yeah.
You know, we just had a client in here the other day, Jackson will remember, and he calls it, I'm going DEF CON. That's his cue to the 3 engineering team to leave the room. And everyone just laughs, you know, because he knows it's abusive levels, you know, and he just wants to have his little victory lap, and it's
well, and the
fun
funny
for
thing
him.
is, like, we love abusive levels as
Well,
much as
sure,
the next
yeah,
guy.
yeah.
We just can't do it all day for hours and hours
Yeah.
and hours. But one of the tricks I remember, a buddy of mine up in St. Louis, Adam Long, would talk about doing hip hop sessions where it's a party in the control room and
Yeah.
it's on the big speakers. And he once told me, he was like, man, I just put my earplugs in all the way and just turn the speakers up. And I was like, and at first I was like, oh, that seems kind of weird. And then I started doing that recently. I was like, oh, this is great. Cause when I tried to turn them down, everybody talks too loud. So I just put my earplugs in, turn them up. And now I'm not talking about making tonal sonic decisions. I'm talking about, when it comes to timing and tuning, you don't need a whole lot of information.
Right.
You can do low volume.
When they're supposedly making, and I don't have a pair, and I should get fitted for some, where you can be fitted for in-ear molds that reduce by a certain number of decibels but keep it flat.
I messed with those for a while.
I would like to try that.
And I kind of gave up on it.
Really?
Like if I go to a live show, I prefer the foam ones.
Okay.
So this is what I trained myself to think about that. Well, first of all, most live shows sound like shit anyway. So
Right.
I'm not missing much. It's a crappy
You're just
sound
there to
in
see your favorite band. or
Yeah,
whatever,
I'm there for the energy and the visual and see them play and perform. But instead of thinking about like, oh man, it just sounds like it's all muffled, I'm like, no, it's a bass boost, dude. I'm giving myself a bass boost by listening to foam earplugs at shows. And then I'm like,
exactly.
this is great.
It must be running something through a great tube compressor because the top end seems nice and soft.
It's tricky though. Conversations are tricky in loud clubs.
Yeah.
But people leaning over and yelling in your ear to say something, I'm just like, I'm putting earplugs in.
Yeah. No,
I lean right in.
I always wear the foam ones
Yeah.
to any
Yeah.
venues and events. Yeah.
And the fitted ones, while I did have those earlier when I was younger, I found they were very uncomfortable. They were really stiff in your ear. So they're probably different now. I mean, I'm talking about 30 years
I'd
ago.
like to try them. And, even the Apple ear buds that we're talking about, they get uncomfortable after a couple hours.
They do,
But it is what it is.
So one of the challenges for me is when you're in the control room and the guitar player or the bass player is doing an overdub and you need the speakers kind of kicking so they can feel it for the overdub. I'm like, I can't sit up closer to the speakers than you for this whole stretch, So I've been trying to figure out ways to do that. I'll stick in, again, I'll do things like get the sound and then put earplugs in and put gun muffs over my ears to just knock it way down. Because again, I'm just listening. They're just doing their thing, listening to some performance stuff.
Yeah.
But I wish we had like in-ear things that would knock the level way down, but had a built-in mic so that when you talk, it's like it comes in at a normal level. So you could like talk between takes. So I'm putting that out there to all you designers who are listening to this podcast right now.
I try to be protective, but at the same time, I don't want to go overboard. Something that I've learned in my career is the massive amount of information that I can learn from non-engineers,
right?
Even though I'm an engineer.
Yeah.
Going to lunch with session players and producers and just being a fly on the wall, just hanging, the conversations you hear early in your career and even late in your career are very informative on what people like and they don't like. So do you want to be successful? Listen to those conversations. Yeah. And you start finding, for me, that's where after a couple, I had already been engineering, and first thing you do is I'm putting EQs on everything.
Yeah,
because that's what I do. I'm mad with power. I'm in front of a Neve or an SSL or whatever, drunk with power. And I find out at lunch that electric guitar players don't like that at all. Like they know their heads and their speaker cabs and their guitars, and they want to be able to dial in the tone, knowing that what they're hearing is them. Yeah. They don't want to hear 6 dB of boost at 5K on an API. That's the worst thing you can do for them. All it does is screw them up. They may be too polite or kind to, they're professionals. They're going to make it work. But that's when I was like, okay, that makes perfect sense. I didn't even think about it. Piano players hate being over compressed. Most of them don't like any compression on tracking days. They're professionals. You think, well, I compress piano players all the time when I'm tracking. They never said a word. Well, they're trying to be professional, but they want to hear, they're playing a very dynamic instrument and they want to hear that dynamic. So many different things, little things like that I learned. But another one was, I've heard multiple times producers and stuff talk about, we could go over to whatever's never, whoever's place, but he just won't turn it up. He like, I can't hear. It's just blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh God. It's like, I want to take care of my ear. So how do you find that balance? Knowing that it could cost me work if I'm seen as a diva behind my back. They're talking about me. It's like, Carol won't turn it up loud enough to, so we're going to go somewhere else. That's where the art really comes in, right? It's how to balance this stuff. It's like, okay, how do I protect my hearing, but at the same time, make it enjoyable for the clients? I think the right answer is sometimes, for me at least, the right answer is sometimes me and my assistant are going to get abused a little bit.
Yeah.
We're going to be putting in a 9-hour day, and we're not going to like the volume that it's at all the time.
Yeah.
But we're being paid for our service, and we're going to give them what they want and take care of it the next day if we can. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music, like the new iZotope Plasma plugin featuring flux saturation, which helps you sculpt the harmonics in your sound, enhancing the excitement and clarity of your tracks and mixes. And Ozone, with its built-in mastering assistant, helps you analyze your mix, suggesting all the settings you need for a professionally mastered result based on your chosen style of music and EQ curve, or reference a specific song if you want. Ozone features sophisticated yet simple modules like clarity and impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, allowing you to adjust the settings to your taste so it sounds incredible. And with the magic of master rebalance, you can even manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums separately at the mastering stage. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma, Ozone, RX, or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com. Howdy, rock stars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Joe Carrell joining us here. We're right here in beautiful Treasure Isle recording recorders. How do you guys pronounce it?
It's really not Treasure Isle anymore.
Oh, it's not? Okay.
No, it's just kind of unofficially. People still remember that name, but the guy who owns that name and used to manage the building is not involved anymore.
Is it Joe's Jam and Jump Joint?
Yeah, why not? It's like people call it the old Treasure Isle. What used to be Treasure Isle, Joe's Place, whatever the case
Joe's
may
place.
be. Yeah.
That's pretty good. You can have a little sign with an arrow.
Yeah.
Flashing.
But now I don't own this. So I should say that anybody that wanted to work here, if you're like, man, that seems like a cool room. I think I might want to work in there, record something. Just hit me up on Instagram or Facebook.
We'll have all that link right in the show notes.
I'll book you time in here. We don't have an official website or anything, but all that's in the plans. We just got there's a lot of reasons.
Great place. So Joe, you ready to jam?
I'm so ready to jam.
Well, so let's jump into some mixing stuff a little bit, because I know you got a lot of cool thoughts about that.
Mm-hmm.
Your videos are great.
Thank you.
You really, I don't know if did you start, was it like around 2020 that you really dove in and started doing the video thing?
Maybe it was around 18.
Okay. So earlier than that. Okay.
Yeah, it was pre.
That's certainly when you and I did our first thing. I think we did a studio tour.
During COVID, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've since, I think, made a ton of great videos. So you're doing them for your channel. You do them for Produce Like a Pro. You work with different companies helping to highlight their stuff.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that I've seen that I thought might be fun to ask about, obviously our audience loves seeing, the beautiful Triton. Is that an A range behind you?
No, this is an 80, but it's a rare 80.
Yeah,
it's a
big
5.1. Yeah, it's a 5.1 80.
Oh, so you can mix and surround.
You can.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Triton 80 series, the times that I worked on it, my takeaway was like, wow, this is a great rock and roll console.
Mm-hmm.
It just had a
immediate.
it had a real punch to it.
Yeah.
And that was really nice. And all the outboard gear is so cool. But obviously we live in a world of software too, which makes a lot of things possible. Harrison Mixbus was something I saw you making videos about it, maybe even recently.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. What is that a tool that you find yourself using at times?
Well, I should say I'm fairly new to it. So I'm a Pro Tools user. I think a lot of people don't like to hear this, but when you get to a certain level, you have to be, because that's what every studio that you walk
it's like
into.
speaking the same language.
It is.
In a place.
I mean, you walk in any studio in London, New York, LA, whatever. If it's a legit studio, that's what they're going to have. So you just have to know it, and you're going to receive sessions as Pro Tools files, and you have to be able to send them back, as Pro Tools files, all that kind of stuff. But that said, I know the guys at SSL extremely well. Developed a great relationship with them. And because I'm a huge SSL fanboy. I mean, I'll just admit it. Like,
you spend a lot of time on an actual SSL console.
I love the 4K and the 9K both, and duality. I've got to use quite a bit of each one of those, and that EQ to me is if I could only have one EQ the rest of my life, it'd be that.
Which one?
Probably the E series, the 4K. I just freaking love that. But also the 9K, because the extended top and bottom. But that's not just necessarily the EQ's fault. That's a combination of the whole circuit that has more top end and bottom end.
Well, let's rewind a little bit. So the SSL plugins that are available now, the Channel Strip 2, I think that's the one that I'm using a ton.
Yeah.
And I think, is that modeled after a 9?
That's most like a 9K
or something like that.
9K, yeah. So it's going to be the fullest range, the lowest
the EQ
octave.
has the E button, but then there's also the 4K E,
right,
which is gorgeous, and that goes back to
very early 80s.
Yeah, that's
the
like
4K
like
E,
kind of Phil Collins.
Well, the original one was the 4K B.
4KB,
which was 1978, I think.
Yeah.
And there was only like maybe, 11 of them ever made, or 7. Not very many. And they actually have that in a plugin too, because it sounded entirely different than.
Yeah, it's very cool sounding. It's got a little more grit to it.
Yeah, and it's dark, but that's, to me, when you talk about things being dark or bright, that's not a bad thing. That's just a tool, so that going into it and use it where it's appropriate. But yeah, that 4KE is just a really special thing. But so Mixbus was one of those things where Produce Like a Pro had me go to the Harrison facility
Factory,
because it's
right
here in
Nashville,
Smyrna. Yeah, it's in Smyrna. So it made logical sense for me to go tour the facility and get a look at all their, they had come out with a new 32C console and all that kind of stuff. So while I was there getting the speech for the products, as part of the tour and things that was going to air on Produce Like a Pro, they showed me Mixbus, and I remember especially immediately thinking, you know what? I think that's the most clever, intuitive, inclusion of Atmos that I've seen of any.
Right, you did mention that in a video that you thought it was integrated really well.
It very well. Even with the console, with that 32C console, that stereo or the master pot, volume pot is a 7.1.4 pot.
Right.
It's like, wow, like that's brilliant. Why is no one else thinking of that? Anyway, all that to say, I told him, I was like, I'm really interested in trying this. I'd like to do a couple mixes on it. And so a little while later they reached out. I was like, hey, if you really want to try this, let's do it, and let's film it, and we'll make a thing of it. And
have you been messing with some Atmos mixing too?
Yes, I've done only about 5 or 6 songs, and a mini movie. It was like maybe a 6 or 7 minute like cartoon animated feature that was for the film festival circuit.
Cool.
All that to say, I don't have an Atmos room yet, but I am installing one now. In fact, Jackson and me were unboxing and assembling speaker stands and measuring for cable last week. So the speakers, not the overheads, but the speakers are in place. The 7.1. We just got to install the 4 now. So it's it's not only the future, it's the now.
Yeah.
If you go to Apple. And other streaming services, Spotify, it's coming to Spotify. Labels are demanding it. Apple is saying if you're going to get featured on playlists, which every artist wants, it has to be. I think most of us that make our living doing this are just going to, whether we like it or whether we don't, we've just got to accept the fact, just like, our predecessors didn't accept the fact that Pro Tools was some of them did and some of them didn't. There's the engineers. Do you remember the engineers that wouldn't accept Pro Tools? I do.
Yeah. I mean,
and I can tell you that they're not working anymore.
right.
So big life lesson right there, right? So those very, very highly skilled, analog engineers that wouldn't accept Pro Tools, all of a sudden we're losing jobs to guys 25 years younger in experience and skill level because they knew Pro Tools and were savvy at Pro Tools. I'm not going to let that happen to me. And I just as a way of speaking to your audience, I don't know that they want that to happen to them either. We just got to accept that Atmos is here, whether we like it or not, and roll with it. And the thing is, once you do it, the like it or not part goes away. You're going to like it. You're going to like it.
I'm looking forward to doing it. I just finished getting my, I'm a little behind the time. So I just got my stereo speakers sounding really great in the control room.
And now you got to,
I got a Carl Tat system and it's really wonderful. And then I called Carl. I was like, dude, what if I want to do the Atmos thing? It's like, well, you got to do that times 12 or whatever it was. And I was like, okay. So
how much is that going to cost?
Yeah.
Right?
So I may have to consider, a secondary Atmos system of different speakers or something, but we'll see.
And
it seems like one of the things about Atmos is you want all the speakers to be equivalent if you can. Ideally, a sound coming from any direction has the same full spectrum.
Right. Now you can, the overheads can be smaller. First of all, there's not a lot of information going up there unless you're really going, like hardcore. But even then, it's not vital. A lot of they're hanging from ceilings, so a lot of times you can't justify hanging a 30 or 50 pound speaker from the ceiling.
It reminds me of it in college. My friends who had an apartment who are artists and would do like shocking artistic things.
Yeah,
they suspended an Underwood manual typewriter on a nail above the couch. So you're like sitting on the couch and there's this incredibly heavy object right above your head.
Yeah. But you're right. They do recommend the 7 that's around you on the floor or 9, depending on what the size of your system are the same. Although there are guys out there successfully doing it that where they're not matched. So I think at this point, it's like whatever you can do to get into the game, I think is a big deal, just to get in the game.
Well, so let's jump back to Mixbus 32 a little bit, because that's certainly a lot more immediately accessible to everybody listening than installing the whole Atmos system. But what are some other things that really struck you about that, and why would somebody maybe consider it? Because a fair question is, and we just got it written down right here: which DAW should people choose to make records in their home studios or whatever?
That's a great question. I think if you're doing it in your own studio and you're not trying to, you have no intentions to move to LA or to New York or to Nashville or wherever and become, the next Chris Lord-Halsey or whatever the case may be. There are 1,000. Well, that's an exaggeration, but there's like 6, 7, 8 DAWs that are all great that do the same thing.
Yeah,
they'll do the same thing in a different way. Maybe they call their shortcuts are a little different. Their terminology is a little different. But as long as you learn it, you can get there with all of them. I don't care if it's Logic. They're all great. I mean, that's one of the great things about where we're at right now. Studio One, there's so many. But for guys that are taking this serious, and we already kind of addressed this, but if you're like, man, no, I want to be in that chair in Nashville. Like I want to be on these 10 songs a day sessions that you're talking about with Brent Mason in the room and there's all these legendary studio players,
of session musicians.
Right. You have to know, you just have to know Pro Tools. So just get to know it. But, I think your other part of that question was, what did I like about Mixbus, for some of these guys and where it found a home for me. I don't know. I feel like some of our older audience or audience that have spent a lot of time mixing front of house or traveling with bands or anything analog where there's an actual mixer, it seems like you're working on an analog mixer. And that's a really cool tool for a lot of our, your viewers probably that don't want to get bogged down in the DAW stuff. They don't really, some people still just don't love all that. They want to know the shortcuts that they need to know to do their minimum thing. And that's all they want to know. Mixbus was like really cool that way because it feels like an analog console. Your effects sends, your EQs and your compressors and everything are already there on every channel.
Yeah.
So it's not like just like they were on a console. You didn't think about, like we overthink all that stuff now in the Pro Tools world, because we have to. It's a empty canvas until we tell it that it's not, and create a button. All the buttons are already there.
Yeah, and unless you've worked on a console, it's hard to, and a console mix typically would have been matched up with like a band. There's
right.
bunch of mics for drums, this instruments, and you're balancing all these musicians playing together. But like that, the speed of working on a console and the feeling that you're playing an instrument when you're making music, when you're mixing, is what's so appealing to me.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I love.
Be able to dance around. Yeah. You've got a short clip I saw. You're like, the engineer that people think they got, which is like, you're sitting there quietly listening to classical music. And then the engineer they actually got, and there's like tunes jamming and you're doing handstands and dancing around on the console. That is what it feels like when you're really having fun mixing and making music, is you want to feel like you're dancing around,
Analog consoles are, I just think they're fascinating, and they're a power piece. I mean, you feel when you're the lead guy on a session and you come into whether it's a room you've worked in 100 times or a brand new room, like when I go to Ocean Way a handful of times a year, biggest Neve in the world. I mean, you feel like you're Bob Clearmountain driving a Ferrari. I mean, it's like, man, I'm untouchable. I'm the king of the world. I mean, analog consoles are freaking amazing in every way. And if for our friends that haven't got to use them, an SSL console specifically, where you even had dynamics and gates on every channel and a stereo bus compressor, the sounds you could get quickly. I mean, like banging, competitive mixes.
You just dial it. You just turn something until that sound is coming back at you out of the speaker.
Next channel. You don't have to patch anything if you don't want to, because those SSL channel strip compressors, I think, are one of the most cool, underrated compressors of all time.
Yeah.
I could use that. I could do a record on an SSL console with no other piece inserted whatsoever any day of the week, and would love it.
The other thing that happens when you have a console, and this applies to controllers that are well done too, but is you might be turning an EQ knob, but your other hand is on the fader and you're rebalancing it in the mix at the same time.
Or you're turning the Q and the gain at the same time, or the frequency and the gain. I mean, it's just very intuitive. It's very intuitive. And something you brought up, because I'm a big fan, again, I'm a big SSL fanboy. I don't even try to hide that. That's, ever since I was young.
That's my next question that's queued up. We're going to be talking all about it.
Okay, well, I was going to say, most of us came up watching Bob Clearmountain.
Yeah. And
so you wanted to work on the tools that Bob Clearmountain used, right? And Chris Lord Algier, name your heroes, Michael Brower. And so, to me, it's still like putting on a Bulls jersey anytime I can, and that says number 23. I'm Michael Jordan anytime I'm using an SSL console.
I forgot to ask you where you grew up. Where are you from?
Southern Illinois.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Yeah.
Rock your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring the new Contact 8. This comprehensive collection includes a fantastic range of versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative studio effects, giving you everything you need to bring your music to life. Whether you're composing emotional scores, deep dance floor grooves, or experimenting with sound design, Complete 15 has you covered. Discover powerful plugins and instruments that guide you from the initial idea all the way through to the final mix. The included Contact 8 introduces exciting new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a cutting-edge hybrid instrument that merges organic and synth sounds in real time. Plus, enjoy revamped versions of Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro to take your sound to the next level. Then polish your mixes off with the AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11 included in Complete 15 bundle. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com.
So that said, I have the UF8 control surfaces, a couple of those, and the UC-1.
Me too.
So
we're on the same team.
There you go. So
okay, first question.
All right.
UF8 on the left, UF8 on the right, UC-1 in the middle.
That's what I've got.
That's what I did too.
Yeah. Because I want the EQ to be right in the middle of it. So we were talking about the immediacy and the coolness of being able to have two hands going at once and just moving quickly without a mouse. And that UC-1 has been a godsend to me.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend that to your viewers that are wanting to, either they were analog guys that despise the mouse like I do. I mean, I make my living on the mouse, but that doesn't mean I like it. I still hate it.
Yeah. Well, you, like me, when we got into this game, it looked like a sporting event. Like, it's a big studio. There's knobs everywhere. There's all this stuff. You're running out and doing things.
Yeah.
And then it evolved during our career to now you're sitting in a chair with your elbows at your sides,
right.
going click, 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 click. And, at a certain point, you're like, what the hell?
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't agree to do it like this.
Well, and I've developed a tremendous amount of wrist pain.
Yeah.
From just overuse syndrome. Most of us will over our career develop various problems. That said, that UC-1 has been a godsend. So, and I think Soft Tube just released something that's similar.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to just say, hey, SSL.
I'm still,
even though that's for me.
I've worked a little bit with both. I still prefer the SSL. It just feels like an actual.
It really does.
Matches the actual console.
Yeah. So for guys that either are trying to get away from the mouse or from guys that grew up in the laptop world, it's like, man, they watch Bob Clearmountain or CLA videos and they're like, I want that too. Like, I want that feeling. That little UC-1 feels like that.
Yeah.
Like I really, it's a very, very cool tool to dial in. Like a lot of times in my template, I have SSL channel strips all over the place. Again, I'm fanboy.
Yeah. Let's talk about how you do that, because as a user myself, and I think anybody who dabbles in this, you begin to, first there's this thrill of how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the discovery of like what doesn't work the way you expected it to. So, and then trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way for me to use this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
SSL 360 app, for example, integrates flawlessly with these, but in ways that if you just grab a fader and you start grabbing an EQ, that EQ is on that fader, for example.
Right.
But that doesn't always translate the same, particularly with Pro Tools. So what have you found is some good strategies to use the hardware with the tools that, like Pro Tools, where maybe it doesn't match up perfectly, for example?
Yeah, that is, I think I've just gotten used to it. And so I at first I wished it was a little better than it was as far as integrated with, because I don't know how many times I've turned the EQ to the wrong channel.
Right. And we've all done that before. Before this, you've done, everybody's tweaked an EQ and they're like, I just spent it, all that time dialing in the bass sound, and I went to the vocal and I just destroyed the bass sound.
Right, exactly. There's a couple cool things though. Number one, it's not a hardware surface, as in this is a hardware surface where there was, hey, this is what it is, and there's not modifications.
By this, he's pointing to the
console
for the audio listeners.
Right. Okay, so, but for us software guys, even though we're using a piece of hardware as a control, the UF8, the UC-1, whatever the case may be, whatever they have, artist mix, blah 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 blah. Even though it's hardware, it's still software. There's firmware that make it do what it does, and in the case of SSL, there's the 360 running in the background. That stuff is being updated and modified constantly.
Right. So they're always improving.
Exactly. So even though I'm unhappy with this aspect of something on the the Pro Tools controller or the SSL controller or Soft Tube controller, whatever the case may be, it's going to get better. If it's a successful product, for example, it sticks around for a long time. And SSL has been tremendously successful with those hardware pieces. So they're going to put resources into making those things just continually better and better to keep people buying them and keep existing users happy. So even though instantly there were some things, it was like, oh, I wish this would scroll with Pro Tools the way it says. Everyone online says it scrolls with Logic or whatever. Maybe next month, all of a sudden it does. So I'm just kind of dealing with the same way that I dealt with every other control surface I've ever had. It's like, okay, these are the ways I'm going to use it, and I'm just going to stick with that. You know?
I use it a lot with Pro Tools. So very quick question is, have you found yourself opening up the 360 app and looking at that while you're working very much?
I don't. I probably should more. I have a little.
I feel like if I had double screen set up, it'd be cool to have like a screen that looks like a console in front of me, and that's where that 360 is laid out or something. And in order to do that, your first move would be for every track you open up in Pro Tools, you just automatically have the SSL.
Right.
And I think you can do defaults like in Pro Tools, right? You can just have the default new track have an SSL plugin on it.
Or most of us start from templates nowadays too, so we import. First thing I do when I get a mix in, a set of multi-tracks is, other than the cleanup work and gain staging and stuff, is import my template and just start from there.
Yeah. Where do you put the SSL plugin? Do you put it at the first plugin instance on Pro Tools or at the end? So you're like, it's as if you process your sound and then it's hitting the console.
In the middle. So
Slot 5,
like so on drums, for example, I've got that auto align from Sound Radix.
Oh yeah. I just was chatting with those guys.
Right. Yeah. So that's there, for example. Now it's in bypass because a lot of times it's well recorded and it doesn't need it. But every once in a while you get something where you're like, okay, everything's out of phase with everything, and the simple flip of the phase is not going to fix it. It's just the mics were not, properly placed. So that's is a day saver. So I have it on the first row made inactive. Does that make sense?
Just for the drum tracks or for every
just
track?
Just drum tracks. I'm just giving examples of why the SSL isn't first.
Right.
And tape. Usually I have tape made inactive but ready to go across, the either the first insert or second insert on everything else.
As if whatever was recorded
was there in the first place.
Recorded on tape.
In the first place, yeah. And so then I hit my console, which is generally the SSL. And I in my template, you're going to see channel strip 2s from SSL. You're going to see 4Ks. You're going to see 4KB-Bs. And then also Brainworks. They have incredible sounding solid state logic pieces.
And now the SSL, the UC-1 controller will integrate with any of the other plugins.
And that's exactly what I did. I let it, because I never installed VST3. I always just AAX, so I had to go back and install a lot of VST3s and then let it scan. And now I can pull up, if I want to pull up the AMEC 9098 console, which
is a great sounding one.
Exactly, I can do it because that's one of my favorite bass channels, for example.
Do you put it in the dirty view mode or
the other one? Yeah, exactly. But
it's still got finger smudges on
it,
right?
But I can still do hands-on with the UC-1, which is what
right.
Your point.
And with those, they pretty much match up the EQ frequencies, like high and
for the most part. I think it's the 9098 is the one that's opposite though, where the gain and the Q or there's something that's backwards by default. Okay. But you can change it because you can assign it to
tell it to do it the other direction. There is something else new I discovered. So one of the things that's very cool and useful, can be very useful on the UF8, is there's a rotary knob. And there's buttons with it. And one of the buttons is called focus. And with the focus button, I'm telling you probably what you already know, but you put you hover the mouse over a plug-in button, and then you grab that knob. And if it's in focus mode, you turn that knob and it's turning the knob on the plug-in, which is more fun than, having to do it with a mouse, I find, even the wheel on my trackball. But sometimes, occasionally, depending on which plugin, it might turn it the wrong direction. And then you're scratching your head. You're like, which way do I want to tell the mouse movement? And I discovered there's this handy little free plugin or a little app on the Mac called like Scroll Reverser. So you just download that and then you can just enable that in that moment and everything will scroll the right way and turn it back off again.
Yeah, anytime we can get away from the mouse is a good thing for me. But next, so sometimes there's compressors that I like before my SSL channel strip.
Right.
On electric guitars, for example, I have multiband compression because sometimes if it's too sharp or strident and attacky, I will run a multiband compressor to kind of knock back the attacks of the guitar before, so it's more consistent before I ever apply my channel strip EQ and things like that. And so that that's just an example of why the SSL is like in the third slot or something.
Yep.
But I'll have even though the SSL may come up on about 80% of my channels, I'll have API, Neve, or vanilla flavorless things like Fab Filter and things like that. It made inactive and they're bypassed, so they're not using any DSP. But if I go start mixing and the guitar parts are adding up, and I'm like, okay, I can't even though the 4KE is my all-time favorite electric guitar EQ, I can't use any more channels of it because it's all just starting to sound, the same.
Right.
And that's one of the beauties of mixing in the box. But even in hardware world, all of our heroes always had a handful of channels of APIs and Neves and things behind them. So for me, like I can switch. Maybe I'm on guitar pass number 5 and 6, and it's another stereo pass of something. I'll switch to the API, and that way when I boost, it sounds completely different. And all of a sudden it finds its home in the mix.
Yeah.
Just because I switched the circuit. Because those analog circuits sound different.
It's like using the same mic for a bunch of overdubs.
Yeah.
You start noticing that whatever the signature of that mic is gets accentuated because you did so many layers of the same thing.
And that's a lot of our heroes knew that, right? That's why they had all those various pieces in the rack to differentiate certain things from certain things, and it all starts at the recording process, but by the time we get to the mixing process, all that's determined. So the tools that we have to use to our advantage to make a mix sound better, as in the modern era of track counts getting extremely high, a lot of times for me is differentiating between various sounding analog EQ models. It's a big tool. It's a very powerful tool.
And then you mentioned Plugin Alliance Brainworks. They have some nice features in there where it's sort of like a randomization across a bunch of channels, which I think helps with that a little bit too.
And they're built in. I think it's called THD or something like that. Total thermal harmonic distortion. Is that right? Is that what it stands for?
Yeah, THD.
The drive, basically.
Or third harmonic distortion.
Yeah, it is stunning good at times. So, for example, on my, I have channels here and there where I know I really rely on that sound. So instead of the SSL brand plugins, I'll use the Brainworks plugins in those instances, even though it's still a 9K or still a 4K. That one feature is what I'm after.
Right,
that makes sense. That drive,
and the 4KB's got a little bit of that drive in there too.
Yeah, it does.
From SSL.
And the 4KE also has the mic pre-gain built into it.
We actually just made a new plugin recently called the MBSI with Make Believe Studios and Metric Halo, and it's a plugin in collaboration with Bill Simzik of my famous MCI console that was in my studio for 15 years. I'll have to show that one to you because I don't know if you've seen that one yet.
I have not.
But it also has some of those features, so you can do randomization between channels and dual mono mode on stereo things, so it gets a little.
The dual mono thing is legit.
Yeah. So talk about that feature, because you do stereo width is an important thing that you teach as well. What do we want to know about that?
Well, first of all, there's nothing to be afraid of. I think a lot of our friends that do teach against that, or it's because if you remember, when those things first came out years ago, it was just a phase trick. So it sounded great in the sweet spot, right? But then you'd sum it to mono, or you'd leave the sweet spot. You're like, oh my God, what happened? So I think there's fear left over from that era, but we're not in that era anymore. These tools are amazing. In fact, what I do when I think about using a stereo widener, if I get some new ones in a bundle or something in there, I'm trying to upgrade my template or something like that, the first thing I do is push it too far. And then, on my monitoring box on my console, beside the mix position, it has a mono switch. So I put it in mono and take that plug in and bypass it, make it active, bypass it. If I don't hear any difference whatsoever, there's literally nothing to be scared of, at all. So I like to use a little widening on the stereo bus from the SSL Fusion, which I have a hardware box if I'm mixing hybrid, or in plugin world if I'm mixing, with everything in the box. It's fantastic. It's an MS widener. It's just really great at what it does.
So MS stands for mid-side.
Right.
And that again is the classic. The sides are automatically, by definition, they're out of phase from each other. So if you sum to mono, the side goes away and you just hear the mid, typically on something like that, right?
There's no options to solo the sides or anything like that from the.
I just mean in general.
You mean technically behind the scenes.
Yeah.
It's very good, very clean at what it does. Not that it's the only one, but there's other things that I'll do within the mix. So if that's on my stereo bus, let's say I have a song that's got drums, which are going to their own aux, and then I have a group of guitars and keyboards that's going to their own aux. I have the vocals. Maybe I even have orchestra. So what I'll do is I'll go into maybe just the orchestra subgroup and put just a little widening on that too. So it's like the orchestra is kind of surrounding the entire mix. So everything sounds wide, but it's the orchestra can sound a little more immersive than the
it can
drums.
Sound wider.
Yeah, because and I'm talking about small numbers. I'm not using extreme like let's say you can go 100%. I'm not even daring to touch the one, like the 50% world. Like I'm not even thinking about that. Usually I'm in the more like 10 to 30% range.
Yeah.
And that adds up. So if my whole mix is 20% or 30% wider, and then there's some elements here and there, maybe it's a couple keyboard passes, maybe it's the orchestra, maybe it's the power, the hard, the hard pan electric guitar parts, the left and right ones or something like that. That's just a little bit wider than other things in the mix. It's just a way of creating extra dimension to me.
Yeah.
And so I'm not scared of wideners.
And one of the things you mentioned, I think, is probably a critical takeaway too, which is the enveloping, like imagining the stage of sound and like, what are you trying to do? Like, I mean, Al Evans, when he was on the show, he talked about, he prefers not to make he's a drummer. He prefers not to make his drums really wide in the mix because he's like, why would the band be inside of my drums?
Right.
Yeah. And it's like, it's just an interesting way to think about it. It's like, you can picture a singer inside an orchestra, but you might not picture an orchestra inside a drum set or something with a singer.
Right.
So like maybe that's a good way for us to think about stuff.
Yes. Like for me on my drums, I pan the overheads around, and it can vary, but like my starting go-to spot is around 75% for the overheads.
Yeah.
And the toms would be maybe 30 to 50. You're not going to have a high-pitched tom over here,
like way to your left, right? Because
it just sounds very unnatural.
The high tom is in the center of the kit. Anyway.
Yeah, just a little left of center. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And by panning them too extreme, sometimes it causes weird. It doesn't gel well with the overheads because the overheads are giving you an accurate representation of what that kit was. So sometimes it's good to solo up your overheads and hear the toms and kind of put them. Not that you can't cheat and go a little wider than that, but sometimes going extra wide, you're like, why is it just not working? It's because it's not working with the overheads anymore.
Yeah.
So that's something to think about.
Do you feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for more of a simple and straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mixing system from Grammy-winning mix engineer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix in your home studio that will sound great everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. That was absolutely the most helpful and informative block of information and mentoring on the mixing process that I have ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up pro tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, I'm so confident that this will help you take your mixes to the next level, that if you can't get a killer mix in 30 days, I'll give you a refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And hopefully I'll see you in the front row of the Grammys. We just mentioned vocals too, so let me go to that because that's really important. One of the things that you're great at, and especially listening to your playlist and the music that you've done, Rockstars, we have that included in the show notes. So please go click through and you can go hear all these records that Joe's done. But what a great sense of vocal. That's you clearly have a true deep appreciation of the importance of a wonderful sounding voice. And Once Was by El Sarah, for example. Beautiful, beautiful voice. and also just a really cool use of a delay throws in the vocal and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I thought to sort of close out, let's talk about stuff that you have learned about making sure that your vocal recording is really beautiful from the start through the mix, and maybe that's too wide of a question.
No, that's a great question.
And then like fun stuff like delay throws, which really is more of a comment on vocals. Static mixes are wonderful for beginning a mix, but a vocal performance from top to bottom of a song, maybe we don't want to think about static. Maybe we need to think about it as breathing and different treatments in different moments and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Well, what I want to say before I start getting into the recording part is, if we're trying to make our living at this, a lot of times who is either hiring us, who is deciding to go along with the producer's choice to hire us, asks for us on record number 2 because of experience with number 1, or says, no, not that guy, is the singer.
Right.
So it's like, even though we may be drummers, we may be guitar players, we can't underestimate how important the lead vocal is to our career. I mean, it really, really is. Even if we are only caring about how great our snare drum sounds, like we have to serve that vocal. That said, recording wise, I have a lot of microphones. I have a problem,
I do too.
I have gear acquisition syndrome, but I'd like to think about the vocalist, that specific one, and choose a mic that seems to match with their sonics.
Okay. That's a great thing to suggest. How do we go about doing that?
Well, okay, so my first go-to setup of the day is probably going to be a 47 because they sound great on almost everybody.
Okay, cool. And for those of us who didn't have a 47, it might be just knowing what mic you have that tends to sound good.
Right. So for me, when I think of I always, no matter what brand the mic is and how modern it is and what the model number is, I always think of things, probably because of my age, I think of a C12, like very, very bright, very airy. When they're cool, they are extremely cool. And when they're not, they're just way too thin, way too lispy, transient rich, they just don't match the track at all when they're wrong. Then we go to 251, which has got some of that pretty air, but it also has a beautiful creamy mid-range.
Right, yeah, it does.
So sometimes we want to lift a singer out of a track, and they don't have sibilance problems, really strong T's that sound like S's and things like that. The 251 is the perfect match because we get that top end lift, but we still get that beautiful, creamy, beautiful mid-range.
I just got a Roswell Pro Audio Aztec, which is their version of a 251. And God, it sounded so great.
When they match the vocalist, they're a stunning microphone. A 251 is.
Yeah.
And then
acoustic. It sounded really good on acoustic.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. I use 251s on acoustic sometimes. And then I think of the 67, which is right in the middle, kind of the neutral mic that, because it's neutral, almost has a mid-forward quality. Mm-hmm. It kind of pushes, but that's where a lot of times when we use a 67, it's on things that we want to cut through that mid-range in a mix.
I have a 67. I've used that a ton on stuff and loved it.
Yeah.
But there are times where the word I wanted to use was like on, and especially on some female vocals, I felt like it sounded strident. It put too much edge into a voice.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I had a guy explain that to me one time about the way it's manufactured. Part of the design is like I got a feedback thing.
Oh,
interesting. Where and I'm trying to think of the terminology he used, but it was real. When he told me in his good way of explaining technical stuff to an untechnical guy, I remember thinking, now I know why I get that sound sometimes on really loud singers. Like I get it. And then you got the 47, which is perfect. I mean, just great in every way.
Yeah.
But
how do you describe the sound of a 47?
Heaven. No, but
and a tube 47.
Right. Oh, absolutely. But
like a lifted top?
Well, no, not to me. I think I think the 251 is lifted on top.
Right.
And I think a C12 is especially lifted, or the Sony. I think the 47 is beautiful on top, because it's not excessive. But for some people, it's not energetic enough. So they need the energy of a 251. And at 47 also can be on some male singers. It gives you so much low mid warmth and thickness that you have to carve all that out. It's like, this is almost too much, because they're just a big baritone voice or something.
I do a lot of rock stuff, and a lot of stuff where there might be a lot of information in the mids, and it's always striking how a really wonderful sounding mic on its own. It's like discovering that you can't mix by using the solo button.
Right.
You'll pull up a sound, you're like, God, that my U67 sounds so wonderful on the lead vocal, but then I'd put it in the track and I'm like, why does it just sound like the singer's disappearing into the track? Whereas an SM7 helps them cut through. So it's always fascinating the way mics interact with the combination of everything too.
Yeah. So I like to sometimes it's people we've worked with before. If it's somebody we haven't worked with before, a lot of times you can hear them talking and if there's a sibilance problem or how deep the chest cavity is. So you're talking about football, but in your mind you're like, you're thinking about the microphone that would work. Another to me just a crucial part of the chain is the preamplifier.
Yeah.
It's got to be a high-end amplifier that gives a 3D image.
Yeah.
Low quality preamplifiers. If that's what they have, if that's what our friends have, that's what they should use, because there's never a reason not to make music. Never let the lack of gear hold you back. But that said, when you can't afford it, circuits like a Neve sound amazing because they're bigger.
Any particular?
Well, all the old ones, the transformer-based, 1073s, 1081s, 1080s, anything from that era that's got like the Carnhill, St. Ives, or Mariner. Is that what it was called before it was called Carnhill? All those transformers make everything sound bigger than they actually are. Well, we want our vocalists to sound like a star. We want them to sound better than they really are.
I've noticed that about like sometimes I have mic pre's that are very clean, which can be wonderful in certain situations, but when a vocal goes on it, I'm like, oh, it's not coming forward towards me.
It's just missing a depth of energy.
That bring that.
I agree.
Forward.
But then, then again, a Neve does have a harmonic distortion footprint, which is awesome for a lot of things. You mentioned El Sarah, that's a 73. And we actually we made sure we went near the point of very audible harmonic distortion at times, because we were looking for that rock vibe for her on a lot of her songs. Another thing that's sitting behind me is the Moog pre-EQ. That is a transformer-based preamp as well, but it's a higher headroom, cleaner transformer sound. So sometimes we're working on music where it's got to be stunning, right? Jazz, Broadway stars, there's just times where we don't want harmonic grit added.
Right. Yeah, because especially those big stage performances.
Oh, big, massive dynamic range.
People. Yeah, the singers will, you're just praying that what you're engineering doesn't somehow get in the way of the performance.
Because you never want to hear the circuit. If we used a Neve on somebody with that kind of dynamic range, it's like all of a sudden,
it's what happened? Yeah,
what happened?
It doesn't. Why did it get squished?
Yeah, why is it distorted? Is that distortion I hear? Yeah. Well, it's like, yeah, but it's pleasing. Well, maybe if it was, Green Day, right? So I think matching up a preamp, even though I generally stick only with transformer-based or tube-based things, I think matching a preamp and mic is really important.
What's the preamp when you're like, please don't let me get in the way of this diva?
The Moog.
The Moog.
Okay. Ever since I tried it for the first time, it was like, okay, that's what I was looking for. And another good one is the Avalon 2022.
Yeah.
Which is the non-tube version. I have two of the 747s, and they're amazing, but they also are a tube circuit, so you can get harmonic distortion. The 2022 seemed to have a lot of high headroom. And the Neve 9098 was actually a really good vocal preamp as well. That was really clean because it's a Neve circuit, transformer-based circuit, but it was later in life, Rupert Neve. You probably noticed, and a lot of our listeners do too, as he aged, his tastes got cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, but that's not a bad thing. Use these tools to your advantage. Match the tools to the match the tools to the sonics. Okay, so that's capturing, right? Is making sure we have the right microphone and the right preamp to get the job done, and making sure our gain level stays safe. That's a big problem. I just mixed a song yesterday. A guy does all his recording in his home. He's a great singer, and but he sometimes overdrives the mic pre in a very distasteful way. But he's in the middle of singing. He don't really know. He's not paying attention. He's just thinking about the performance. But as engineers in the control room, if we're producing, we got to be thinking about the performance too. But the gain levels and the compression levels and all that are really, really important to keep your eyes on. But then in the mix, for me, there's a couple things. I listen to it with the vocal because I got to know what story we're telling, right? We got to know where it's going. Is there a bunch of vocals? Is it a trio or a quartet? Or is it, a soloist with some patty, airy background vocals, no background vocals? Like, we have to know what we're getting into before we ever do anything else. But that said, I actually, once I know where I'm going, I mix the band first. I mute the vocals. I don't even have them on. Every once in a while, I'll turn them on a little bit softly when I see how, let's say I'm automating the electric guitar in verse 2 to make sure that all his fills are popping out. Well, I want to know where the melody line in that verse is or something.
Right.
So I'll have it on softly and then I'll mute it again. So all that to say, I'm creating what I think is a great consistent bed for the vocalist because they're the star. Mm-hmm. So then I know exactly where to put them because I got a great bed laid with the rhythm section and the orchestra or whatever the case may be. And then for me, after that, it's really just a matter of all the obvious stuff, EQ, compression. But here's where I'm different than some of my peers. And as I came up underneath an established veteran that did things the hard way back in the old days, which meant hands on a fader, like VCA, not even moving faders or anything like that. Hands on a fader, making sure, because he didn't want to over compress it, but he wanted it to be perfect at all times. So he got a lyric sheet, Lidge, and slid it in a sheet protector. And then he got a grease pencil and wet paper towels. And he would sit there and listen to the vocal and write arrows. He would up or down. And then he would put his finger on the fader and let it play back and do whatever the arrows were telling him to do.
So he could preemptively do it before the
right. He was writing the faders during the recording. Yes, he would change his gain levels and stuff going to tape
against the lyric sheet even at that stage?
Yeah,
wow,
absolutely.
That's hardcore.
And I do that too. But during the mix stage, he was listening and he was doing the same thing because compressor alone is never going to get you really there. Some people would disagree with me, but he would do that multiple rounds of it. So he would take and wipe the sheet clean, listen, do another round of arrows until it was perfect. Wow. It may take him 45 minutes. It may take him an hour. He didn't care. It's like what mattered to him was that when the mix was done, the vocal was freaking perfect. Every word.
That's fascinating because we might think about, in Pro Tools, you could just do clip gains on things. But we probably, as we were saying that, probably would think, the moment you hear it, you adjust it and you keep listening to that one section. And it's cool to hear that description where you just listen through as a listener and take notes and then come back and make the changes. And that's the kind of listen first, take notes, then make those changes. That's what makes doing mix recalls work well a lot of times. It's like you don't allow yourself to get caught back up in the minutia of things. You just say, these are the changes I heard. I'm going to make these changes.
Right, yeah.
So that's cool to hear you describe that. For 15 years, I had a famous MCI console at my studio that originally came from Criteria Studio C in Miami, where it made some of the most iconic Grammy-winning records of the 1970s. And it sounded incredible. When I was ready to upgrade my studio to a full digital mixing setup, I teamed up with Rick Carson at Make Believe Studio, Metric Halo, and Golden Ear producer Bill Simzik to recreate the legendary MCI console simple as the new MBSI plugin. The MBSI captures the same iconic sound used on multi-million selling records like Hotel California for the Eagles, Saturday Night Fever and Staying Alive for the Bee Gees, I Shot the Sheriff for Eric Clapton, We're an American Band for Grand Funk Railroad, and the soundtrack to Grease, the movie, all for legendary producers like Tom Dowd, Todd Rundgren, and Bill Szymczyk. The MBSI plugin not only delivers the authentic sound of the original MCI console faithfully, but it also adds new features like a top-notch compressor, overdrive, and a dual EQ filter switch, adding tools that Bill Szymczyk said he would have loved to have in the original console. Now you too can get that Grammy-winning MCI sound in your home studio. Whether you're recording or mixing, you can experience the sound of Miami 1976 with the MBSI plugin and soak up a little sunshine in your sound at makebelievestudio.com/MBSI.
So our friends get their chain going, right? This is the compressor. And yeah, clip gain is part of that because you can't have wild dynamic swings. Right, so we clip gain and set our compressors based on the level of post clip gain. Yeah, absolutely. By all means, use clip gain for that. But then the sound of the compression is part of the sound of the record.
Right.
So we don't want to undo that and use, for me, like the sound of the compressor goes a long way to making it sound like a finished product.
Right.
It's not just dynamic control, it's the sound of the compressor.
Right.
So after we've got our clip gain, after we've got our compressors going, then the automation that I'm talking about, note by note, critiquing it at a low volume, because that's when you can really hear at a low volume. You're not getting hype, you're getting what's real.
Right.
And you need to be able to hear every word of the vocal because they're the star. So at the lowest volume, you're down really low to where all you're hearing is those key ingredients. You should be hearing the kick and the snare, the lead vocal, and is it power chords? Is it a piano? Is it acoustic guitar? What's driving the song? Like those four things should be the star right up to the point that we don't hear any music at all because we have it muted, basically.
Yeah.
So that's what I was taught. And he even did it on NS10s and I still do that because that's the way I was taught. Because the mid range is so exposed at that point. And are they good sounding speakers? Not at all. But that mid range forward thing that they do really helps us get our vocal levels nailed. So for me, the last point on vocals is putting the time and effort into making sure that every syllable is exactly the right volume and every S. For me, most often it's not a de-esser. I'll use de-essers to the point that they sound good, and then after that, they don't sound good.
Right.
So then I will clip gain as I'm listening. As I'm automating. There's a lot of times I'll do a separate pass of just critiquing
Still
T's
down
and
low
S's.
level for S.
Oh yeah,
for S.
Yeah,
that's a great tip.
Absolutely,
that's a really key tip right there.
Because you want the S needs to be present, and it doesn't need to sound like they have a lisp. But at the same time, if people are listening loud, it shouldn't bite their heads off.
And you'll get a chance to check it that way.
Oh yeah.
But while you work on it, work at it at low volume. And the cool thing about discovering low volume, it's like a whole new world. It's like, oh my God, it's so exciting. I love quiet music now.
Yeah, right.
But working that way means you can work at length, and I'm not feeling exhausted. I'm not feeling like, turning speakers up, having something too loud while I'm working feels like I'm flinching away from what I'm trying to do.
Right. I say, what I teach to some of my students or interns and things, and this goes for mixed decisions as well, but even volume decisions, push back in the chair versus being sucked into the speakers. When I'm mixing and I'm making critical decisions on levels, low volume listening pulls me into a focus that I don't have otherwise. Like me and the song are like at one.
Yeah.
And any noise in the room is going to make me angry.
Yeah.
Because
that's what I was trying to talk about earlier.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, stop breathing.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you turn your heart off?
Right.
I can hear it pumping.
Exactly. I'm a big believer. But do I start the mix and in the mix with some, moderate volume? Absolutely. You
that's crucial.
You got to know.
Too.
Yeah.
That's crucial too. It's just that my window of opportunity for enjoying and having a real take on what it's like when it's loud is tiny.
Mm-hmm.
And my window of opportunity for making decisions when things are quiet is vast. You know, I can work a long time like that.
It's a fact.
Amazing, dude. This has been so much fun to hang out with you.
Great.
And it's very clear to me that you're now going to be a regular guest on this podcast.
Oh,
so
cool.
hopefully I don't screw up the mix of this when I do it.
No, I'm sure it's going to be great.
And, you know, it's actually the closing thought on you saying, you know, going in and manually doing something, you know, big difference between editing podcasts and editing music. With music, it's a 3.5 minute song. I can afford to go in and look at every syllable and every word. In long form podcasts, it's like, it's like, what's the sweet spot for a static mix?
Oh, yeah.
Finding ways to do that. And it's really fun to like discover all the crossover of both those ways of approaching stuff.
I hate hearing myself back on, not interviews, but like tutorials. You know, they'll hire a camera guy. All I got to do is show up and show how to use this product or whatever. Then you hear it on YouTube, and it's like it sounds like really bad. Is
not where you would have done it.
I'm way louder than the music, or the music is so loud that and you can't hear me talk. Or when I say the letter S, it's in the car. I can't even stand to hear myself. It's like, oh no.
the hoops we have to jump through as audio engineers trying to teach audio on video formats is ridiculous. And like
Absolutely.
The video world hardly cares about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like we'll never be able to stream something and have it not show up in mono on the other end.
Right.
Like, oh, yeah. Well, Joe, it's been a total pleasure hanging out with you. Here's a closing question I like to ask all my guests.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine.
Okay.
You go back in time and you find young Joe and you say, listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice do you want to go back and give yourself if you could?
You know what? We've already kind of mentioned it. I would have started, as a young drummer, a young musician, I would have started taking care of my hearing a lot sooner than I did. A lot sooner. Number two, I would have played every instrument I could while I had a chance to do it. Because once life and career hits, you don't have a chance to do it anymore. So I would have spent less time on, Friday nights cruising my little hometown from one end to the other, looking for girls. I would have been at home more, playing keyboards, guitars, drums, mandolins, banjos. I mean, you name it. I would have been, taking every instrument very serious. And, I didn't. I mean, I did, but, I think the playtime was a little more important, at 13 and 14 than it is now. I wish I would have been a little more focused on dominating a lot of instruments instead of just one or two.
I want to encourage our young listeners to understand your suggestion about like being careful with your hearing, because I think there's an easy misinterpretation that means taking the fun out of the loud listening. And I think it doesn't.
No, not at all.
I think we still have fun doing loud listening, but I think what it really means is
unnecessary
learning. Yeah, exactly. It's learning, really getting in touch with your own experience where you're like, okay, this was the part where I really enjoyed it cranked up. And at this point it's just still loud, but I'm already kind of like, now I'm done and I'm like thinking about something else, or I'm wanting to talk to somebody else or whatever. And if you can recognize that in yourself, then you just have foam earplugs and just like sink earplugs in those moments, or like crank up the speakers. And then in the moment where you're feeling a little tired, just turn them down, take a break.
It's the unnecessary things for me. It's on the 4th of July, fireworks, wear the earplugs. You go to the rock concert to see Kiss.
I'm always so far from the fireworks.
There you go. You're going to watch your favorite band in concert. Wear the earplugs. Yeah. You're mowing the yard. Wear the earplugs. It doesn't take the fun out of life. I'm not saying live in the earplugs, and have a good time. But just that kind of stuff is what adds up. Over a career.
Probably like most of us, as you hit 20 or something like that, and you start doing this a lot more, you're going to wake up one morning and be like, oh, my there's a little bit of noise now, or there's a little bit of ringing. So then just take that seriously and just be like, don't freak out, but just be like, all right, from now on, I'm going to like only be loud in the moments that I want to be loud. And the rest of it, I'm going to find some way to, protect my ears from the loud stuff.
And I'll throw one last little point in there. And as we age, all our hearing, all of us experience top end roll off. We all know this is part of aging. That doesn't mean you can't be a successful engineer.
Right.
Well into your 60s and 70s. Look at Bob Clearmountain, who's came out and admitted is like, hey, my hearing is not what it used to be, but he's still turning out amazing mixes. So if it's not a horrendous accidental type of hearing loss, if it's one of these just, hey, as you age, a little bit here, a little bit there is leaving you, your body, our brains learn a way around it.
Right.
And so you can still be an crazy good mixer and not hear anything above 8K. We have tons of our heroes have proved that just based on the way our body adapts.
The frequencies are all really interrelated to each other. And the other thing that occurred to me that was like, duh. I mean, like we start out with this measured assumption, okay, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. That's the ideal range of human hearing or something. It's like, okay, well, not everybody has that exact same thing. And frequencies go a lot higher and a lot lower than that anyway.
Right.
So by default, you're starting out with nothing but a band with, a band limited impression of sound that our brain interprets. So just because the bands change a little in what our physical ears do, our brain is doing the interpreting.
Exactly. So some of our older audience members that may be watching that's starting to get concerned about that, man, if Bob Clearmountain can say, I have hearing loss, and still turns out the work that he does, it is, it's like, if he can do it, we don't have anything to worry about. Of course, he is Bob Clearmountain.
But it's the tinnitus, which is the scary part.
It is.
That's like having, an ever-present little demon in your head.
Exactly.
That you don't want, so.
And again, that's part of life for most of us.
Yeah.
But you can still work. You can still take care of yourself, while you can, I think is the moral of the story. But when age and various things do catch up with you, doesn't mean you can't still be successful. Just like not having the gear you want when you're young isn't a reason not to be working. As you age, don't let the fact that somebody say, hey, here's a 10K sine wave. And you're like, I can't hear it. Big deal. Keep working, man. Yeah. Keep working.
We're not actually using a 10K sine wave as an instrument in a mix. If we were, maybe then that'd be a different story. But it's just part of a bigger picture. So let the rock stars know how they can find you and where they should go to learn more about you. I mean, of course, we have links in the show notes as well.
Perfect. Well, my website, my name is spelled weird. It's Joe, which is very normal, right? Yeah. But my last name, Carrell, is Carrell. So I have joecarrell.com. And all my if you type that into social medias, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, it's going to pop up. You'll find it. But a lot of times
they're ready to make their next hit record. And
call me up.
Recording ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Hit me up. But Instagram is probably my most successful platform. I get messaging there, a lot of times dozens a day, and I try to keep up with all of them. I'm at the end of my day on my couch.
Now, when I show up and make you do an interview for the entire first half of the day, there's no time left.
That's okay. We had this booked for weeks now, so I knew it was coming. So I had this whole morning blocked off the calendar.
Well, man, it's an absolute pleasure hanging with you. What an amazing discussion and place, the studio, and I love hearing you talk about this stuff because you're so clearly, both feet all the way in, even talking about transformers and your knowledge of, there's this, that, and the other thing. So I look forward to doing more of these, and thank you so much, Joe, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Look forward to doing another.
All right, rock stars. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And hopefully the video worked all the way through.
Yeah, let's hope.
We'll see you guys in the next episode. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible. Isotope, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes. At isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes. These are all things that I highly recommend for your studio because they're going to help you make your best record ever. Also, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is new for us here, and it's a great way for you to help support this show, so I greatly appreciate it. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and for listening. My name is Lid Shaw, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.